Hi, hello everyone. My name is Lee Choate, Vice President of Marketing for Watermark, and we're very excited that you joined us for using learning outcomes to determine essential content. We're really happy to be partnering with the learning organization on this informative webinar, so I hope you enjoy it. A few quick words about who Watermark is. Our software gives you, higher education administrators, the insights to improve, evolve, and empower student success. Our integrated solutions create a hub of insights that help you uncover answers to your most challenging questions. Our software is built by people who understand higher education with the goal of simplifying assessment and accreditation, faculty activity reporting, course evaluation and surveys, and curriculum strategy. And one of the things that we love to do is have, speakers join us to share best practices and thought leadership. So today we're going to be, here's the overview of our products, but the star of the show is Kathy. Kathy is an expert in outcome-based curriculum development. She served as Director of Curriculum and Assessment at Cuyahoga Community College, is currently the Chief Executive Manager of the Learning Organization, which is committed to helping college and workplace educators create and improve a learning outcome and assessment system through leadership, instructor involvement, professional development, and system integration. So thank you, Kathy, for joining us, and I'm going to hand it over to you.
Well, thanks, Lee, for that great introduction. And thanks for everybody else who's helping to put this on. Sorry for a little bit of the delay. With technology, it's always a challenge. So I'd like to thank everybody for attending this webinar. I know your time is valuable, so I want to make this worthwhile. I want you to know that the information that I'm going to be sharing today actually comes from an outcomes-based planning and design methodology. And it's a system that's actually documented in the Outcomes Primer series. There's actually 6 components, and we're actually looking at one of those, which is aligning essential content with learning outcomes, which is defined in the content primer. This methodology is actually been around, and we've just celebrated 20 years. And it's implemented across the world in community colleges and universities. So the learning outcome for this session, as well as the outcome primer itself, is use a backward design methodology to determine essential and relevant content that basically answers one critical question: what concepts, skills, and issues must learners demonstrate in order to meet the learning outcome? The flow of this session is we're going to talk about first determining what it means to determine essential content, and then look really at our past. And we have to shift our paradigm on a few things, be able to design backward from an outside-in perspective. And we're going to look at the importance of really analyzing outcomes first, which should really drive the content, and then actually then being able to distinguish what we mean by concepts, issues, and skills when we talk about essential content. So I'd like you to put on your instructor hat for this session. You may not be currently teaching, so I want you to think of a time when you have taught and listen from that perspective and respond to questions I ask based on that experience, whether you've taught a workshop or an academic course or been part of a program. So let's start quickly. I want to do a quick activity. What I'd like you to do is there's in the, you've got a ask a question box. So I'd like you to basically put in that ask a question box, how do you make decisions about the content right now? Or when you think about the course that you were teaching, what decisions did you make and how did you make them? So if you could please enter that in the question area and just enter anything that you did that helped you decide what the content was. So I'll give you a minute to actually put in that ask a question box. And I'm not sure where it lives on your screen. So I don't know if Lee, if you can explain that from their perspective, how they find it, if it's obvious where that is.
Hi, I can jump in. So there is a chat box that you'll see called Ask a Question. It should be just underneath your screen.
Well, they either can't find it or they don't teach. Oh, here you go. So here we have some. Consult the learning outcomes, great. Outcomes course mapping, state standards, professional organizations, look at those. Yeah. District standards, best practices. So you're looking outside. Very interesting. So that's good to hear. I'm used to having people say things like, I look for a textbook, I make a list of some topics. So we're much farther along, I can see, along this, because we really want to think about, what do students really need to learn, and come from that perspective itself. So I want to look at the past before we move to the future, because I want to challenge your thinking a little bit. We have to make a couple of paradigm shifts. Our learners are expected by the people that hire them, and just by being a member of society, we need to be able to think critically. We have to be able to solve problems. We have to really learn from our experiences and reflect on them. And that's what conceptual thinking means and is needed. We need deeper knowledge. We need deeper thinking, because we have to be able to apply this to real life roles in societal situations. And that's the framework that we need to always be thinking from. At the learning organization, we believe that an outcome-based model of benefit learners from a deep understanding of core essential concepts, and it serves as a framework to attach new knowledge. So I'd like you to, again, in the ask a question box, if you could just highlight any of those words that jump out at you in that particular statement. So again, if you can just put that in there. When you look at this, what are the key words that really jump out at you that may challenge and shift your paradigm a little bit? Give you a second to put that in. Deep understanding, outcomes-based, yes. Essential concepts, framework, right. Oh, those are all very important. They're loaded words, right? They mean a lot of things. Learners. I like to talk about learners instead of students, and sometimes I get crossed, but I like to think of them as learners. It's all very important. So we need to always be thinking about it. So we also, I think, need to shift our paradigm about how we see our instructional role. At the learning organization, we consider ourselves guides, not teachers, not instructors, not faculty, but guides. If you've ever gone whitewater rafting, maybe some of you have, I have, but the guide is in the back of the raft, and they're in the back of the raft because then they can actually see what the paddlers or their learners are doing, and be able to give just in time direction and feedback as they go through the learning experiences while keeping everybody in the raft. And so it's really important because guides actually create the learning environment, and they set the conditions for people to do their best learning through relevant real-world learning activities that align with learning outcomes. So I'd like you to enter now in the box, list and put in what are the real-life roles you're preparing your students for. You may be teaching in a program, and maybe that's preparing them for only one role. Maybe it's a broader program and it's preparing them for a very broad and general role. So I'd like to, curious to see what kinds of roles that you're actually preparing students for. So if you could enter those now, I'd appreciate that. Parish ministry, a pastor, I think it's pastoral care, okay. Member of a team, a problem solver, that's very broad but very critical, right? A critical thinker, an evaluator, a teacher, citizen, lifelong learners, and it's really, I think, very, very important to actually have that in your mind's eye as you're thinking about the curriculum, because it's through that lens you want to start to think about the learning outcome, as well as, the concepts, the skills, the content should always be driving toward to support that role. So a physician assistant, very, very specific. But you can see there's a lot, a filmmaker, there's a lot, right? And so always having that in your mind's eye and holding that as you go through this work is absolutely essential. So, all those programs that you're developing, they have outcomes, right? So our real question is, what concepts, issues, and skills are essential for the learners to achieve the outcomes, right? And we defined real quickly concepts as being ideas that learners must understand and apply. It's about depth, not breadth. It's about the issues or problems, challenges, things they have to wrestle with in real life to resolve. The skills or abilities that are really mastered through practice and feedback. So that's how we define that, because it's really that these concepts, issues, and skills form the content for the learning experiences, and the learning experiences have to tie to the outcomes. And that's how you get true alignment. So it's first that we have to start with outcomes, and we have to be able to analyze outcomes. And Dr. Ruth Steele, who actually created this outcome-based methodology, she's the professor emeritus at Oregon State University. She's a thought leader in instructional systems. And she says that analyze the intended learning outcomes to determine essential content is one of the important marks of a strong curriculum. And why? Because that's because it drives the alignment of all the content, right? If you don't have really good outcomes and you can't align them and derive them, there's something amiss. I want to share a story. When I was in my master's program in adult learning, my instructor of educational research invited us to stay after class once and, have a conversation, give feedback on what would make the course more, how to improve it. And I'll never forget it. I gave him some feedback, constructive feedback, professional feedback. And I said, it would help maybe if we had a case study that we could actually tie all this. There's a lot of disparate information around research. And I said, would be helpful to have a case study we could walk through, or some good examples. And he got very, very defensive. I remember it to the day, and this was in 205. And he said, you don't understand. I have a lot I have to cover. And I realized it's not about covering content, because it's really about a process, right? So analyzing outcomes is really about a process of deciding the content in order to achieve the outcomes. The outcomes justify the content. It's not about covering content. And so when we think about envisioning learning outcomes, and we think about them as you've identified some great roles, we're really designing backwards from those roles, from that outside in perspective, and being able to define the outcomes and then deriving subject matter from them. So here's an example where you've got 4 outcomes, and this has to be around a technology role, telecommunication role, and you can see that, a proposed appropriate telecommunication installations that address needs of a specific business. You can see how robust that is. Communicating clearly with clients about their telecommunication needs. You're really thinking about it from what they have to do once they are done with your particular program. And so that's how we need to really think about that. We have to ask the question, are these intended learning outcomes clear enough so that we can make decisions regarding what essential content must be understood and applied by the learners? So is it good enough, right? What is the quality of those outcomes? Are they clearly written? Are they robust? You can actually use a scoring guide to look at an outcome. And so we're going to do that real quick so we're all on the same page. Without strong outcomes, you have a hard time deriving outcome. So here's 5 characteristics of what a good outcome statement has. And it's about action, context, scope, complexity, brevity, and clarity. So we're going to look at an example real quick. So I took this example from an actual course. So we're going to kind of look at it. So it says students will demonstrate the written communication skills and understanding of the methodologies of written communication. So right there's some redundancy, but I took it as is. And if we look at that, we're looking at the action and the active voice. It actually starts with students will. Most of the time, all of the time, we really should be starting out outcome statements with an active verb. So they will be demonstrating the written communication. Sometimes there's even a quicker way to do that. We'll talk about improvement. Context. Is the context rich? Can you get context from that? I don't think so. How about scope? And also, can you do it in a reasonable amount of time? There's some vagueness here. Is there complexity? So if I took a look and I compared it into a better way to really get very succinct, it might be write various types of papers or responses using and being very explicit. I say if it's important, it should be explicit, not implicit. Correct grammar, appropriate rhetorical strategies, proofreading and revising techniques. Now really see the scope and the complexity of what you're wanting students to do. And I just bring this up because if you don't have good outcomes, that's the fundamental of everything, right? So we want to be able to distinguish the concepts, skills, and issues that actually align with those outcomes. Otherwise, if you're just covering content, you may be an inch deep and what's called a mile wide. So we're going to do a quick poll. So how many of you feel personally responsible for covering all the content with students, whether or not it's essential for the outcome? So I think we're going to pull up a poll real quick and let you be able to answer that. Is there a poll coming up?
Yes, the poll is up right now.
Okay, thank you. I know, because I don't get to see everything. So thank you.
Sure.
And when people have a chance to answer that, it will display the answers or the cumulative answers.
Yes. So I'm looking at the poll right now, and 75%, just changed. 27% say yes, and 72% say no.
Oh, I love that. We're seeing a shift. We're seeing a shift. So I'm glad you don't feel personally responsible for covering all. We have a whole different kind of audience. This is so thrilling for me. Um, so, we're sitting in an information age, and we're on information overload. With technology, we can access more information than we know what to do with in a short amount of time. And it's easy to feel pressure because we are time bound, right? And we have to be able to determine what can we do in the amount of time, and we have to have a way to limit what we do so that we're good at it. It's easy to add more, but a lot of times we don't take things out, and we always have to be mindful and make adjustments because before you know it, you could be adding additional courses and additional credits that aren't really needed. And we call this, when we keep adding and don't take away, additive curriculum, or bloated curriculum. But if we start with real life roles and situations, it really helps us be able to discern what's essential content so we can get to actually deeper learning because we need essential knowledge and be able to build on it. Otherwise, we would just have shallow learning. So I'll show you a picture of what shallow learning looks like if you use a metaphor of water. Shallow learning is surface learning. So if you're just doing concepts, you may just be shallow. You've got to get as deep as you can, depending on where you're trying to go. And the deeper you go with applying skills and concepts, and then actually analyzing, synthesizing, and evaluating, you're getting to the deepest kind of learning. And issues help us get there, and skills help us get there, and applying concepts help us get there. So that's really where we're trying to go. So let's do another poll. And that poll is to see if you have experienced any additive or bloated curriculum. Let's see how many of us have experienced that. So
Hi, everyone. We will keep this open for about 30 more seconds, give you a chance to answer. As of right now, 100% say yes.
but it's nothing we've created, right? Because we obviously are coming at from an outcomes perspective, but we sure have experienced it. And that just goes to prove that we have to have a way of really identifying what's really essential, right? That's what we need to spend our time on. So here's 2 principles to avoid it. I love the term less is more, right? In any kind. Spend more time on the things that are critical and less time on the things that aren't. And really the choice of actually determining what's really essential and always asking yourself, is this truly essential to meet the outcome? I always like to say, is it the nice to know or really the have to know or have to be able to do? So there's 4 strategies. This group doesn't seem to have that issue about letting go of perceived responsibility to cover everything, which I think is terrific. The other two and 3 is always about working with others and collaborating with your peers, your constituents, to be able to, and sometimes you're on the board and you're helping to get other people on the board. Somebody said they can't hear. Is that true? Or there's just a problem with my audio?
Okay. You're coming in clearly for me.
Okay. And so we really want to get our constituents on board. We may be there, but sometimes we have to help others that we're working with. Think from an outside in. Think about it, what might be relevant for the role that we're in and what's essential. So we're all working together and on the same page because we're constrained by time. And that's what we always have to be sensitive to. So another way to think about it is lean learning. Lean has been around for a long time. So we're now starting providing it on learning. And learning, lean is really about being able to differentiate between the all and the essential, So now we get to the meat and being able to express essential content in terms of concepts, skills, and issues. Because as we said, curriculum designs 3 questions. What are the concepts learners have to be able to understand or apply in order to demonstrate the outcome? What are the issues they have to wrestle with? What are the skills, right? Going back again from the outside in to be able to do that. That's what's really important. And so when we look at these one by one and we look at concepts actually can be expressed a lot of times in 1 to 3 words, right? And of course, we've got to come from our expertise. We're subject to other expertise, or we are working with subject matter expertise who are very clear and knowledgeable. So working with them to truly understand what are the really critical major ideas that students have to be able, the learners have to be able to understand that will be built on. So it's all about conceptual learning. So here's some examples. This is from healthcare, cellular regulation. It's pretty deep to understand that, right? Digestion, accountability. And so it's actually being able to list and denote content in those terms. And then when we think of issues, issues really get to the essence of what critical thinking is all about, being able to analyze, synthesize, evaluate. It's about being able to resolve the challenges that come up, taking things apart, putting things back together. And sometimes these are harder to think about, but when you're thinking about that role and what it is, or those outcomes, what are the things that get in their way? What are the things they will be challenged by? And then just decide how you may define those issues. And we'll look at an example. But this is where the real meat gets in and gives you some really insight of what you can do to challenge students while they're with you. The other thing is about issues is that it actually provides insight. Insight and really, again, as I said, thinking critically and getting us ready for the real world and the challenges that we will actually, because you really want to transfer learning in the classroom to outside to those real world. So here are some examples. The examples are sustainability, ethical actions, plagiarism. I mean, that happens outside the real world as it does inside. And sometimes issues have supporting concepts. So it's very also possible that sustainability could be a concept that has to be understood and applied. But there are issues around sustainability, issues that make something not sustainable in a business solution. So being able to do that. So sometimes when you're looking at it from these lenses, it may show up across the board. There may be skills that are part of sustainability also. So again, it's just trying to get very clear about all of that. And as I said, skills are really something that's developed through, repetition, practice, feedback, right? Because it's really the evidence. That's what gives the evidence that students have learned because they can apply it. You can see it in their skills. And skills, as we know, can be cognitive as well as motor, and they're really described with an action phrase. So here's a couple. Riding a bike. I know that's something we don't do in a course, but that's actually, I'm trying to learn how to rewrite a bike now. So I think I need some better instructions so they don't fall off. And then we think critically, communicate therapeutically, and really start to generate those and think about those as skills. The other thing about skills is that when you're thinking about them, there can be what we call micro and macro skills. And when we're building a very complex skill, sometimes we do have to break them into subsets. and be able to actually define them and then scaffold the learning to that. So here's an example. Writing a resume might be a micro skill. Sometimes I think that's a macro skill, but you can see promoting wellness is very macro in nature. But you need to think about it in those terms. And it depends also, obviously, the scope of your learning, whether it's a program, whether it's a course, whether it's just one lesson, and you're able to break that out and build on that. So I want to give you a picture to try and put all of this together. So we've talked about outcomes, and we're in a backward design, and we're going to think of outcome first. Now that could be a course outcome, it could be a program outcome. And the next thing we really want to think about, and we haven't mentioned this at all, and that's assessment, right? So we need to put assessment in context of all of this. So when you've got an outcome, you want to be able to know, how will I assess that outcome? What are the various kinds of assessment tasks, some people call them performance tasks, that they can actually do to show evidence of that outcome, and being able to define those. Not only define those, but sometimes to determine, do I have to create a rubric then that defines the quality of that and the level of that? Is it the checklist? Is it a scoring guide? You know, all of that needs to be determined. And the other thing that happens is, when you think of assessment first, you know, after outcomes, it helps you challenge your outcome. It helps you realize that perhaps the outcome was more narrower, or it needs to be adjusted. And going back and forth, because it's an iterative process, it helps you do better refinement of both. And then when you're very clear about that, you can say, well, how am I going to get the learners to get to that place, to be assessed against that outcome? And then that's where you're looking at your essential outcome, or your essential content, through the lens of concepts, skills, and issues. And you've generated all these things, right? So that's just a way, again, to think about this process and how it aligns, because it's all about alignment. If you have things that aren't aligning, then you say it's not essential, or perhaps it is essential, but there wasn't evidence of it, and it wasn't reflected in the outcome. So again, it allows you to challenge that outcome and to help further refine it as you go through this process. So it's never just one, it's back and forth and over sometimes, until you feel like you've got a very good defined design that's identified what I call all the what's, right? These are all the what's. So let's do an exercise here. So here's an outcome. Guide a committee through a systemic planning process that considers both systemic and sustainability needs of the community, right? So I'd like you to actually take a piece of paper out, jot something down, and I'd like you to derive, at least one concept, one skill, and one issue that you think you can identify from this learning outcome. So it's going to take you a little while to do that. So again, look at that. Guide a committee through a systemic planning process. Consider both the systemic and sustainability needs of a community. What might be a concept that will be critical? What would be a skill that would be critical? And what might be an issue? So I'd like you to take some time and really think about that and jot that down. So hopefully you have at least one of each. I'm going to show you an outcome guide. So this is a template. This is a template that allows you to define these in an easy way on one piece of paper. And it kind of aligns with the picture we showed. So again, it's a backward design with the outcome. You can see here in the assessment task, although I didn't ask you to do an assessment task, when you think about this, maybe a good assessment is they have to do a mock meeting, right? And only focus on one community need. So here are 3 skills. Maybe you came up with one of these. So applying a systemic process to planning. That's a skill. They have to know about that. They have to guide a group. That's a skill. They have to be able to identify community needs. That's a skill. And then when you look at concepts, you have to understand what's a system, what's a process, what's systemic thinking, what does it mean to be plan. And then with issues are a lack of system and thinking around community planning. That's the big issues. We don't think in terms of systems most of the time. And then there's this waste caused by short-term thinking. So again, you can deconstruct it. So we design and plan backwards and we teach forward, okay? I want to send one more template that can help you, and then we'll open up for some questions here. So this is what's called a course activity map. And this just allows you and gives you a place to actually plan when you may be introducing concepts, issues, and skills by week. So again, it's just a planning document and even that. So I want to be able to open this up for a couple questions that you may have. Watching our time.
Yeah, we're doing great on time.
Good.
And thank you. This is really informative. There are a couple of questions that I see in the question box. One of them is, for many of our accredited programs, the information overload is due to numerous professional standards outcomes that programs are expected to teach and assess. Do you have any suggestions?
Get on their committee. That's one strategy. Sometimes, because you're accredited, you need to comply, right? That's a tough one. There's a lot of ways to come at that. Being able to use scoring guides or checklists sometimes with students around those standards, if they're applying standards within the context of things, so that again you're actually helping students see those standards they're going to be assessed at. What I've also noticed too, and maybe this would resonate, I've seen accrediting bodies who actually have the learning outcomes, and there'll be like 30 of them, and I'm like, oh my goodness, that's insane. But when you look at them, they're very granular, and so what I've noticed is I look at them and I say, can I, because of the way that we write outcomes, very holistic and very robust, sometimes you can crosswalk an outcome to 10 of theirs standards, right? And it's sometimes it's a repackaging of how you think about it. And it's hard. I mean, I'm happy to have that conversation offline and get more understanding about it, because I need more detail, because they're all different. But those are some of the things I have at the top of my head.
Great. So another attendee is asking, are these handouts available to us following the session?
Well, what I think the slide shows the resources, right?
Yes.
On the thing. So the free templates that I had, showed, you can download for free. So you can go to the outcomesprimer.com templates and go and pull those. And there's a bunch of other templates also, but these are the ones that I referenced here. So you can, and some of them are Word documents, so you can just actually then use them. I believe you're going to post this so you can people can rewatch it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
So everyone will get an email from Watermark after this. Everyone who registered with a link to the recording and all this great information. So, and I think the next slide there's a special offer.
Right.
Um,
Are there any other questions though?
oh, sorry, and I don't see any.
Okay.
More, unless, I mean, now's a great time to add in questions because we do have a few more minutes left.
Yeah. If you have any questions, be happy to answer them here. And if you think of them, I've got my email and my phone number. I'm happy to field questions. It's a lonely world sometimes when we're working. Sometimes we're only working alone. So I know what that feels like. Also, if you're a LinkedIn person, there's my LinkedIn, and you're welcome to connect with me there and stay in touch. But if you have any other questions, now is the time to do. But no, you can always shoot me a question. I'm happy to answer.
Yep, and they'll definitely be able to. Somebody also asked if the PowerPoint slides will be available, and they will be available. So they'll be able to see that on when they get the link to the recording.
Mhm.
And then, yeah, so those are the questions that we have. And, I want to thank you for sharing all this information because what I see in our clients is exactly what you're saying is that they feel like they're in it alone. And, we're really happy to be able to present this kind of, thought leadership best practices so that, people don't feel so alone. And there's just a ton that everyone can learn from one another. So thank you so much for sharing all these best practices.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank that. I'd love to do it. Glad to do it. And as you said, that to encourage you to complete the survey evaluation, we're actually going to provide to the first two people, or I guess that's how you do it, first two people, or a random sample, I'm not sure, that a free copy of the primer and an hour of coaching, because sometimes reading it and doing it are two different things. And you got a taste of it until you try to do it. That's a whole nother thing. But again, you also can think about with your syllabus, if you move to this kind of way of documenting content, what we did in the institution that I used to work for is we altered our syllabus, and we used to have topical outlines, and they still do. And we said, look, now that you've been exposed to this, if you think this adds value, and they said, oh yeah, this adds value to think about it this way, then we actually altered it and said, in addition to the topical outline, you can also include a list of the concepts, skills, and issues. So they actually had both. And that's how it evolved. So you can actually think of involving or evolving the documentation that you provide once you start to think like this. Topical outlines are great in that they provide order and flow, but they don't really define depth and what has to be essential. But when you have this, it's very clear. And what I used to say is, the outcomes and the concepts, skills, and issues, once defined, are non-negotiable. Anybody who teaches it needs to do that. How you do it, that's academic freedom. That's where that comes in. So just start rethinking and challenging people.
Great. Well, this has been really informative, and thank you so much for your time. And yeah, so there aren't any other questions, so be on the lookout to hear back from Watermark and from Kathy. And thank you so much for attending today. Appreciate it.
Appreciate all your time. I know you're busy, and I hope that you got something that you can now add to your toolkit.
Great. Thank you so much, Kathy. Appreciate it. Have a great afternoon.
You too, everybody.